All right, everyone, it's that time of year, so go grab a cup of cocoa or put something in your cocoa, and let's all take in the season. This is about the 12 days of the season. Technically, the 12 days of Christmas runs from the 25th, Christmas Day, until the 5th of January. This list also does not align with Hanukkah. That starts at December 22nd. Today marks the period for revealing the end of the year lists. They are everywhere. And since I feel like I am here, there, and everywhere, I didn't want to miss out. So my list to end of the year is 12 days of a crisis. Why 12 days? Well, the natural tie-in, of course, to the partridge, French hens, and all their friends. But also some days it feels like there is a crisis a day that lands in the laps of PR practitioners like myself. And I could name, honestly, probably 25 PR fails off the top of my head. In fact, last week I was on one of my favorite Twitter chats. It's hashtag Primetime PR Chat. It's on Tuesdays at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. And it's an hour discussing all things PR. Each week is a new category, and it's via Twitter, of course, a Twitter chat. And 2 weeks ago, it was about PR fails. And I loved it. I was stuck at an airport. It was a blizzard in Boston. And so Julia Joy, who is the moderator, she created the PR chat, teed everyone up to ask them what their top PR fails were for the year. Lots of them. Some I even forgot. But this list is all about my PR fails. So let's go and take a listen. Welcome back to the podcast. Let's discuss some PR fails, shall we? As a PR practitioner and someone who makes a living helping people prevent crises in their business, I feel like I'm just drawn to these news stories. So when there's a crisis happening or one that I can spot way down the horizon, my ears perk up and my eyes if I happen to see it online, and I start to listen intently. I socially listen. That means I watch a lot of the chatter online, but I also read the news stories and I follow along. So first, what is a PR crisis? Well, my definition of a PR crisis is, they take many different forms, but in general nowadays, it's when a brand or a person's reputation goes upside down, seemingly overnight. And a PR crisis looks much different today than it did a few decades ago. So yes, there were those sudden events that spread into a PR crisis, but almost slowly. Like for some of you, do you remember the Exxon Valdez oil spill? That was back in 1989. If you remember that, and that was a long time ago, it took a while for that to get to a real crisis level. Imagine if that happened in 2019. With good spin control or spin doctors at the helm of a negative story, it could take weeks for the public to catch up with all the details, which I certainly remember about the Exxon Valdez oil spill. And I also recently listened to a podcast that went into the day by day of the PR crisis that was unfolding. But a name that came out of that crisis, Captain Joseph Hazelwood, names like that, they stay around for a long time, just like the oil. And speaking of oil, another oil spill. Remember in 2010, we saw the worst oil spill in history. The Deepwater Horizon oil rig exploded, unfortunately killing 11 workers and causing the oil and gas to pour into the ocean for 87 days afterward. When people think about or hear about the BP oil spill, they immediately connect it to their former CEO, Tony Hayward. And usually every crisis person will bring up Tony Hayward in one of their workshops. I tend not to, but I am right now on the podcast. But if you remember when he was on camera, he was standing in a scrum of reporters, all the mics in his face, which tells me he was a little unprepared. But he made that thoughtless comment, "I want my life back." BP tried to apologize, backstep. There was a subsequent apology, but it was a serious lack of organization and ownership of the situation from BP. Now that oil spill, I remember. But Joseph Hazelwood, Tony Hayward, those names will stick around forever. They stick around like an oil sheen. So when I talk about a crisis and the damage that it does, I usually bring out the metaphor of an oil spill. You can clean it up eventually, but that oily, sticky, messy residue from an oil spill, well, that stays for a long time and causes a lot of damage directly, indirectly, and residually. So PR fails, here we go. On to this year's list. Now, 2019 did not disappoint. From news headlines to members of the news media in the news, let's dig into the 12 biggest PR fails of the year. And all these crises that happened, it's important to note that they happened through my lens. It's the stories that people are familiar with, I'm sure, but everyone has their own perspective based on what they read online, what they read in the paper, and what they're naturally drawn to. So my list is the list of the top 12 PR crises that I tweeted about, discussed, or talked about in one of my workshops. Now, PR, the difference between a PR disaster or crisis from the past today cannot go without mentioning social media. So we all know that stories can inexplicably go viral. So we all heard of the duct tape banana to the wall that was priced at $120,000 last week. So no one should be surprised when a story like that goes viral, that when someone is in a fix, that's going to go viral as well. But a PR crisis, that can sometimes just really come out of nowhere. It's just a matter of who latches onto it and takes it for a viral spin. Now, the sticks I use to measure PR damage for my list. One, there's the fallout. What was the damage and by how much? Recoverable reputation. What is the ability to bounce back? Was the act that caused the PR crisis due to bad luck or bad culture, unfortunate bad timing, or bad behavior? I feel the more control the person has over their actions and the less they do to control them, then the more impactful or the more likelihood, the increased likelihood of a crisis. But bad behavior alone doesn't make a PR fail. It's just bad behavior. For instance, New England Patriots owner Robert Kraft solicited a prostitute at the Asian Day Spa, if you remember, in Jupiter, Florida. This was way back in January. Now, it did result in a lot of bad PR for Kraft and the team and the Day Spa, for that matter. But it wasn't really a classic PR fail. It was more of a moral one. Get it? So I'm not going to spend any time discussing politics or Facebook, blah, blah, blah. We could go on for days on those. It's too much to cover, and it's almost beyond a PR crisis. Those are just plain agencies, companies, situations in crisis. So let's get to the list. 12 to 1. 1 being the worst of the lot for 2019. Here's my list. Let's go. Coming in at number 12, kick-ass masterminds. Now, some of you, I'm sure, have never heard of kick-ass masterminds, but some of you, if you're watching on Twitter, would have heard all about it because it was more of an online crisis. So outside of the small business world, many people haven't heard of kick-ass masterminds. The founder of the company, Sarah Christensen, which is such a Minnesota name, she was publicly shamed for publicly shaming an applicant because of something she posted on her personal Instagram profile. Go ahead, you can connect the dots there. The applicant, a millennial, and she was wearing a rather, risque swimsuit, bikini. Millennials probably don't call them swimsuits. But eventually, Sarah got herself into a fix because there was a lot of blowback about shaming other people online, especially a woman who founded kick-ass masterminds and helped other people kind of boost and build their online presence. So the fallout was huge, and it was a few days, but she had to shut down her website, shut down all her social media pages, and she even had to cut herself off from her mastermind clients. Now, how do I know this? Because I happen to know one of her clients, so I was on the inside of it. And to be honest, she's probably not listening. I wanted to help her. I was going to help her and reach out via my friend and say, let me help her online reputation. I was going to use it as a case study, but I ended up not doing it because my friend was so annoyed at Kick-Ass Mastermind. So Sarah Christensen, she had her ass kicked over that whole viral PR crisis. Number 11. Remember this ad?
Bullying.
The MeToo movement against sexual harassment.
Masculinity.
Is this the best a man can get? Is it?
That was the Gillette The Best Men Can Be ad campaign. It started at the beginning of the year. I don't know if you remember, that was right around the time that hashtag MeToo, the movement, was still big and gathering a lot of global attention. The biggest problem with the Gillette ad campaign is they tried to piggyback off of a movement primarily about women and women's experience, the hashtag MeToo movement. It's very difficult. You have to be very delicate if you want to capitalize on a movement like that. Hint, you shouldn't do it at all. Number 10. This also happened back in January. A lot of big things happened back then. The actor from the television show Empire, Jussie Smollett, he reported that he was a victim of a hate crime in Chicago. And I will say, I remember when the story started, it smelled from the beginning. During the investigation, police questioned, if you remember, the two brothers who say that Smollett paid them to stage the incident. Smollett, of course, denied it, but his credibility, his brand, his reputation sank because eventually the city hit back. They say that he made up the incident and charged him with a lawsuit for filing a false claim. And then Smollett responded with a lawsuit of his own, accusing the city and the police officers of malicious prosecution. Now, I think it's important to note that Smollett was indicted by a grand jury on 16 counts for this lie. So you never want to do anything where you tell a story. And I think this, again, is another case where Jussie had no idea how quickly this story was going to go viral. The other thing that happened with the story is that when things smell online with stories, there is a whole army of internet sleuths that will pick apart a story. And that's exactly what happened to him. What is Jussie Smollett doing now? Who knows? That's why it's a PR crisis. Number 9, it's a high-flying crisis. It's the Boeing 737 MAX aircraft and the crashes. 2 plane crashes happened, one in October of 2018, the next in March of 2019. It resulted in 346 people losing their lives on the 2 airplanes. Eventually, airlines across the globe grounded the Boeing 737 MAX. Now, the worst part is that after the second crash, it was revealed that pilots had been complaining about the faulty controls. They were unable to maneuver the aircraft. And now we're learning that the FAA is under scrutiny for giving companies like Boeing too much authority and for not fully reviewing the software that the pilots had to use. Now, the first thing they tried to do was hide it. They were trying to seek presidential authority to keep the planes flying in the air, even after the deadly crashes happened. And they were denying any problems, any safety concerns. All of their statements were reactive, and the press interviews pushed it off as, hey, everyone, it's business as usual. But there was a lot of backlash. And again, Boeing's been in business for a long time, huge company. They are going to pull out the typical crisis playbook. But once again, in a social media viral environment, the story exploded. The stock took an immediate dive, costing the company over $22 billion in value. Now, I've mentioned it on the podcast. I know I've mentioned it in my workshops. The one thing that Boeing did do is they really, really took to the public. They went online, and the CEO of Boeing address the public directly. He created a video where he crafted messaging there, apologizing, acknowledging for what happened, and he broadcast it online, put it on social media. They also used a traditional press release, and of course, they did media interviews. That is an effective PR campaign, and that is a PR campaign for the 21st century. However, it was too little and it was too late. And here we are heading into 2020, and it's still a huge story. Number 8, I loved following this story. I still love following this story. The college admissions scandal. 33 parents and 13 coaches were accused of bribery in an effort to gain college admissions for their well-to-do teens. The two names associated with this crisis, Lori Loughlin of Full House and host of Hallmark television shows, and Felicity Huffman. She was on Desperate Housewives. And she was also, her stock was rising even more on the indie scene, the Netflix scene. She was even going to be up for an Emmy. They were both embroiled, and they're both well known of those involved in the scandal. And while the investigation is still ongoing, one of the actresses is already finished with the process. Felicity Huffman, she was the PR win, still landed her in jail. But what the prosecutors reported on her is that she quickly took responsibility for her actions. If you watch the coverage of her walking into the courthouse in Boston, she was dressed demurely. She looked down. She looked sad, repentant. She was concerned. She was sad. You could tell that she was visibly, non-verbally acknowledging and apologizing for her role. And her personal statement read in court said as much. She handled herself in a classy way, they say, and that's likely why she had the sentence that she did. It was very brief. It was less than 2 weeks. Now, as opposed to Lori Loughlin, when she showed up to her first hearing, if you remember, she was in the tan suit and she was walking down the sidewalk in Boston with her hair blowing in the wind, signing autographs. She was fighting all the charges. She's still fighting the charges, and she can go to prison for a very, very long time. Why is it number 8 as a PR fail? Well, when I talk about when there's lasting damage, Lori Loughlin will likely never, ever work again as an actress. Felicity Huffman, the word on the street is agents are already starting to work with her. There's a lot of directors and producers that already want to work with her. So there you go. PR fail versus a PR win. Next, PR fail 7 and 6. We're going to combine them and call them Houston, we have a problem. So in the number 7 spot, the NBA found themselves in a bit of a no-win situation when the GM of the Houston Rockets, Daryl Morey, supported the Hong Kong protesters on social media. You probably didn't even see the tweet or even what he said. He had captioned an image, "Fight for freedom, stand with Hong Kong." It's like dipping your toes into an issue. However, it blew up everywhere. So in reaction, the partners and the sponsors of NBA and China suspended all their ties with the league. There's a lot of money in China for the NBA. The NBA had to come out and they had to brand the tweet as regrettable, quote unquote. But there was still a lot of damage. Morey did delete his tweet, which never makes any difference with all the screen grabs, and he did post an apology. But that story was a big one in Houston. Number 6 in our Houston, we have a problem series. Batter up the Houston Astros, or the Cheaters. As you all know, if you listen to the podcast, the Houston Astros played the Washington Nats, and I was a Nationals fan and wanted the Nats to win. 1, because I like the Nats. 2, because the Houston Astros are cheaters. But that wasn't the PR crisis. The PR crisis started in the locker room, and a few episodes back, I'll link it in the show notes. The assistant GM to the Houston Astros, his name was Brandon Taubman. still Brandon Taubman, but he's the former assistant GM of the Houston Astros. After they won their spot in the World Series, they had in the locker room celebration. He apparently jumped up and started screaming. We got Asuna, who was the pitcher that they received from the Blue Jays, who had also been charged with abusing his girlfriend, the mother of his child. He was suspended, but the Astros picked him up, put him on the team. Three female reporters, were covering the post-victory celebration in the locker room. They reported Taubman's reaction and that Taubman had directed his chants and his expletives towards the women. One of the female reporters from Sports Illustrated was wearing one of those colored bands supporting the victims of domestic violence. She immediately reported it. Here we are, folks. It's the viral age. So it's 2019. Stories in Sports Illustrated are automatic. They immediately go online. It's not like it's 10 years ago, 20 years ago, where the reporter, most likely it would have been a male, filed the story. So they went through editing. Then they had deadline. Then they went to print. And then the article might show up 3 weeks later. In the Viral Society, the story wasn't even a story. It was a tweet. It went everywhere. The Houston Astros, where they hit their foul ball and where they went into PR fail territory, is when they denied that the story happened. And they stood by their assistant GM, and they also doubled down by saying that the reporter was wrong and they discredited her. Never do that. As you've heard me say before, you never want to pick a fight with someone who buys ink by the barrel, meaning the press, because they will go after you, which is exactly what happened. In response, this is what the GM of the Houston Astros had to say about their front office.
We have separated with Brandon Taubman. He's no longer an employee of the Astros. His behavior was inappropriate and not representative of who the Astros are and our culture and what we stand for. That original reaction by the Astros was wrong, and we own it as an organization. There were many people involved in reviewing that and approving that, and I'm not going to get into the details of that. It was wrong. It was the Astros' decision, and that's where I'm going to leave that.
Okay, so I'm going to go into extra innings with this example. Even though they were able to clear this story, Taubman was fired, and the Houston Astros went about their business being losers to the Washington Nationals. But then, which often happens after a crisis, there's always a second punch. These types of mini crises, they come in threes. The biggest one might be the first one, the second one, or the third one, but they usually come in a series, and I like to say three because it's a nice, tidy number. After the locker room story died down, next we started to hear some rumblings, either news reports or online in articles in a series of tweets, where people started accusing the Houston Astros of cheating. They brought back and recycled stories about them cheating and using signs, using technology in the field, once against the Red Sox in the playoffs. These stories started to creep out, and that's what happens when there's a PR crisis. It creates these fissures, these little openings within the story for other stories to come through. So then we started hearing about the cheating, and then you started hearing stories that it was a long-term program that they had and a policy that they had within the Astros. One of the pitchers put out a statement saying that they had cheated after he left. Now, an interesting tidbit is part of the reason why this story started to leak. They said that it originated from a Reddit post bringing up the idea that the Houston Astros were cheaters. And the day that it was posted on Reddit was the day that Brandon Taubman was fired. Dun, dun, dun. Next up, 5. America's Got Talent, a late entry into the 2019 PR fail game. This PR fail happened after Simon Cowell of American Idol fame. He's the producer of America's Got Talent and one of the hosts. 2 of the female judges were let go. One of the judges, Gabrielle Union, was let go, and she did not go gently into that dark night. When she was let go, she started making some allegations about the toxic work environment at America's Got Talent. Union had also mentioned a offensive incident involving Jay Leno, where he made a disparaging remark about a painting. Go ahead and Google it. But there was a lot of tension on the set, it was reported, and Gabrielle Union was let go. But she, out of all the judges in the history of America's Got Talent, had the highest social following. So she's the one that had a high public opinion rating on the show, which meant that when she was fired, people knew about it, and the blowback was immediate. Union eventually tweeted that her team had met with NBC to discuss workplace culture, and she said that she was able to, again, express my unfiltered truth. There's that big word, truth. And a lot of celebrities and the Time's Up organization, they've all been very vocal in their support for Union. So NBC, once again, was in the thick of it with bad PR. Number 4 PR fail of the year. This is something that when it first happened, I didn't see it. I only saw an article about the apology. The name is Ken Fisher. If you haven't heard of him, listen to a tweet that cost him almost $4 billion.
It was a fireside chat with Ken Fisher. It was a true debacle. It was horrible. Things that were said by Ken Fisher were just absolutely horrifying. He made comments about genitalia, talked about picking up on a girl, and don't show him what's in your pants. He made a reference to Jeffrey Epstein, talked about charities are immoral, mentioned things about tripping on acid, and other inappropriate comments.
That was from a financial advisor who was based in Pasadena, California. He was attending a CEO Summit conference in October and was watching the fireside chat with Ken Fisher. And he said his jaw dropped as he spoke. He said it was horrible. And he was talking about, he said the comments that he was talking about women, picking them up in a bar, comments about genitalia. It went from being a behind closed door comment to very much out in the open, especially when that rant made by a millennial was put on Twitter. And the reason why he makes my list is because, one, he lost $4 billion, but also it embodies a PR fail of the moment, of the modern age. Take an executive, take someone, we'll call it an okay boomer, and they have a moment where they don't recognize what they're saying can go beyond the room. And when it does go beyond the room, it goes online and it goes viral, and it goes viral fast, and they have no idea what's happening. Now, once it caught up with Ken Fisher, he's another one that made one of those apologies where he had to parse it just a bit. First part of the apology went something like this. Mostly the audience understands what I am saying, is what Fisher said once the backlash started. That's an answer that we often hear immediately following a viral explosion moment. That person has no idea what happened, no idea why it went viral, and they're going to parse it by saying, I apologize to the people who I offended, or I really had no idea what all the fuss is about. But as the media attention remained on Fisher, he had to keep issuing apologies because he was losing money and fast. The follow-up apology sounded a little bit better, and it was an apology for this age. Some of the words and phrases I used during a recent conference to make certain points were clearly wrong, and I shouldn't have made them. I realize this kind of language has no place in our company or industry, and I sincerely apologize. That is an apology for the modern age. Next, another bigwig who made a big mistake. Number 3 goes to Matt Lauer. The Matt Lauer, Brooke Neville's sex scandal in 2019 was quite a story. I did a special podcast all about it because when Matt Lauer finally spoke up, I could not help but speak up myself. So a quick recap. As many of you know, Matt Lauer lost his job due to inappropriate behavior. He was one of the bigger people to come down because of the MeToo scandal. It was reported that Matt Lauer had a number of affairs with underlings at NBC, and he was subsequently let go. The journalist Ronan Farrow, who was at NBC, who was a correspondent for MSNBC, and then he was a part-time correspondent for NBC, or I should say part-time on the air, he started working on the Harvey Weinstein story at NBC, and he felt that that story was being pushed aside. Eventually, he left NBC and he continued to write books, won a Pulitzer Prize. And then he had a follow-up book called Catch and Kill, where he details a relationship, particularly with Lauer and the producer Neville's. Now, when the Ronan Farrow book was about to drop, the publishers gave Matt Lauer an advance copy of the book. So he and his team, his lawyers, his crisis team, they were able to read the book. And if you ever listen to my episode about Matt Lauer, I'm going to include it in the show notes. I discussed a strategy that they had to work with. It was a limited one. But I felt that a strategy they were following is trying to find the bright side of Matt Lauer's reputation. In his case, it was limited. He was divorced at this point, or soon to be divorced, I believe. He had been accused of being sexually inappropriate at NBC, having a special button on his desk that would automatically shut a door and let women in the door, and behind it, left in his office with him. Allegedly. He also had apparently had carried on affairs, that a lot of blind gossip items about that. Basically, everybody knew he was a cad and it was all out in the open. Lauer, for his part, never spoke up and never said anything until he wanted to. When the book came out, his team had to decide, what are we going to say about him? He's a cad. All of the favor and goodwill that he's had is gone. But the one thing we do know about him is that he's a dad, and he's a good dad. So how can we show that he's a good dad? They had his daughter, I assume. I can't imagine a 16-year-old doing this on her own, managing her father's reputation. She put a TikTok video out, and Matt Lauer and his daughter did a quick little music video on TikTok. Now that I spend a lot of time on TikTok watching it, I go deep down the well on that social media app. I always think, I wonder why Matt Lauer ever agreed to do a TikTok video with his daughter. It just doesn't make sense. So it also tells me that Matt Lauer and his team really didn't understand the nature of TikTok, because a PR response should never, ever be on TikTok. But here we are, it was Romy Lauer mouthing the words to a Heathers song from the Heathers soundtrack from the Broadway musical. And there's Matt Lauer dancing along with his daughter. Now, I don't begrudge them for trying to show the angle of him being a good father. That was pretty smart. But to do it on TikTok, needless to say, it didn't work. The book came out the next day and he was trashed all over again, and he knew it. He was losing. So what he finally did is write a letter, a very detailed, almost forensically detailed letter about the sexual relationship that he had with Brooke Neville's. It was painful to read. It was cringeworthy to read, but it was all that Matt Lauer had. And what I had said in the podcast about Matt Lauer was this: the reason why he was brought down wasn't just because of his behavior. It was caddish behavior. It was bad behavior, and he should have lost his job. But the reason why Brooke Neville's went against him and went after him wasn't because they had an affair or she wanted to bring him down. It's likely that he ghosted her. He said as much in his letter. And when she was ghosted, she felt that the only course of action that she could regain her power was to speak to Ronan Farrow, and that's what she did. So that's why Matt Lauer is number 3, is because he's in that position where he fell far and hard, and it's going to be very difficult for him to come back. Number 2, another late entry into the PR fail list of 2019, but it shot to the top. Listen, and you will know exactly what this is.
5 days in a row. You surprised? I am. 6 a.m. Yay.
Rising with the sun.
That was totally worth it.
Let's go, Grace in Boston. 50 rides.
She just said my name. A year ago, I didn't realize how much this would change me.
Oh, Peloton. You ruined one of my favorite running songs, by the way, too. But last month, Peloton, the high-end exercise equipment company, now they say beloved by wealthy, skinny suburban moms living in homes with glass walls for windows, and also moms who want to lose 25 pounds or more, who have to pedal in their dank basements because they're the real Peloton customer. But Peloton severely miscalculated an ad campaign where they went after the former audience instead of the latter. It was a tone-deaf 30-second holiday video ad that people seem to really, really, really despise. It was titled The Gift That Gives Back, where a man gives his wife one of the company's stationary bikes, which retails for over $2,200, by the way. I would love one, but honestly, this made me think twice about it now. But the ad where it takes a turn for the absolute worst is when you see her hold up the camera and says, all right, first ride. Wait, let me have her do it.
Give it up for our first time ride.
All right, first ride. I'm a little nervous, but excited. Let's do this.
Doesn't that make you cringe even when you hear it? But anyway, we're left with watching 30 seconds of her pedal away on her 105-pound frame to a 104-pound frame after 1 year. And at the end, she says, I didn't realize how much this would change me. Thank you. But all the women watching that ad collectively said, no, thank you. And here we are at number 1, the partridge in a pear tree moment of my list of the top 12 crises of 2019. This honor is bestowed onto His Royal Highness, Prince Andrew, Duke of York. Specifically, his car crash of a television interview to answer to his relationship with the late Jeffrey Epstein.
In the interview, he denied, as he has all along, that he had sex with an underage girl at the London home of Epstein's friend in 2001.
I don't remember meeting her.
But his every comment is now being dissected. Photos like these, for example, released to dispute the prince's claims that he couldn't have been sweating in a nightclub, as his accuser has claimed.
I have a peculiar medical condition, which is that I don't sweat, or I didn't sweat at the time.
If you read any news account or watched commentary on video or on social media, there isn't one person who has said that it was a good idea for Prince Andrew to go on the air and speak about his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. It was such a mistake. You should never do that, especially when the chips are that down. Unless you're extremely well-versed in public relations or speaking on the air or messaging, you should never sit down in an environment like that to defend yourself, especially for the indefensible acts that he did. Prince Andrew's life has been in a downward spiral, and quickly, ever since he did that disastrous interview about Jeffrey Epstein. And he's the man who took his own life amid that sex trafficking scandal. We all know about it. And it was only days after the globally aired interview on the BBC that Prince Andrew announced that he had received permission from his mother, Queen Elizabeth, to step back from public duties for the foreseeable future, which means forever. Most publications dubbed the interview a car wreck. I saw car wreck over and over again. PR Week called it a masterclass in PR disaster. I like that too. But my favorite review of the interview was this. I expected a train wreck, said Charlie Proctor. He's the editor of the Royal Central website, and it covers the monarchy. That was a plane crashing into an oil tanker, causing a tsunami, triggering a nuclear explosion, level bad. Prince Andrew pretty much lost it all. So he lost the support for his Pitch the Palace sponsorship. He lost all of his tie-ins with all of the organizations in London and England that he was a part of. And of course, he tainted his second daughter's upcoming wedding, Princess Beatrice. His name is as mud as can be, which is the reason why he is my number 1, because he's the one, Prince Andrew, Duke of York, who fell the farthest and landed the hardest. So there you have it, the 12 days of crisis and a partridge in a pear tree. That's all for this week. Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. I hope to have you back here next week. Until then, bye for now.